Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We welcome you once again to another edition of Wednesday Night with myself, Inayat Wadi, where we look at issues that impact on us on a local and a global level. And as we welcome our listeners, our viewers on Salam Media this evening, many of us by now already know about the ConCourt's judgment providing recognition for Muslim women's rights and also equal recognition in terms of protection as far as marriages are concerned. Now, we have covered this issue over and over again, and now that it had basically reached the apex court and the judgment has been issued, what does this actually mean? And we are going to be joined by our panelists this evening from now right until 8 p.m. We've got Siham Samai, Director of the Women's Legal Center, and we also have got Aisha Roika, Chairperson of the MPL Network, to unpack what this ConCourt judgment means and what of these are. Now that within the Muslim community, there is mixed reaction to the ConCourt judgment, and the whole question of Sharia law also comes into play. We tried to get hold of the ulama to respond, but they have told us that they are studying the judgment and they will definitely come on in terms of their thoughts and to the ConCourt judgment. But right now we're going across to joined by both our panelists, Siham Samai and Aisha Roika. Well, we've got both our panelists on screen right now. I see both of you, Siham and Aisha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to both of you. Welcome and glad that both of you are able to join us this evening for this all-important discussion.
Salam Inayat, shukran for having us.
Yeah, shukran. Assalamu
Yes.
alaikum.
Yes. Aisha, I just want to start off with you because, before we get to the actual judgment, now, obviously, you've lived this experience and we've had this discussion before as well, where you've had a huge battle and because to put this ConCourt judgment into perspective and to understand what this ConCourt judgment really means, you yourself obviously have been, exposed to what it actually means as far as Muslim women are concerned, and particularly in the case of marriages, particularly in the case of divorce, when it comes to issues such as children support, maintenance. And I think this is important for us to understand, to build up to the discussion that we want to have, and also to study the judgment in a lot more detail.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I was married for 19 years by Muslim rights, and upon dissolution of my marriage, I didn't have any cut and dried entitlement to a share in the assets that we accumulated over the duration of our marriage, and because there was no legal framework which governed Muslim marriages, I was left at the mercy of my ex-husband to, for him to decide how he wanted to. Pay in respect of maintenance, and I needed to approach the court for relief because it was just up in the air. So this is really a fantastic judgment that we've got, in that it's going to afford women some form of certainty upon entering and exiting a marriage. So yeah, I had a tough time. My matter went on for 5.5 years until I was finally forced to settle.
Yes. Now, Siam, we can go on discussing the merits and the demerits of this judgment, but the key issue here at the end of the day is we are talking about women. We are talking about protection of women, and I'm sure as the Women's Legal Center as well, there are many, many cases like the one Aisha obviously has had to experience, and she mentioned that it's been a good few years. So there are many women in that situation right now as we speak.
Yes. Well, I mean, we know what is some of the discrimination that these women face on a daily basis is because Muslim marriages were not recognized in our family law. Muslim women were not able to protect their rights to housing, to land, or any other property that they've contributed to during the marriage. A major challenge is actually the enforcement of maintenance, nafaka, post-divorce maintenance, maintenance for children, also challenges around ensuring that there's a just and equitable distribution of the assets at the termination of the marriage. And that is exactly what Aisha was speaking about. Um, because there were no legal divorce proceedings in court, one of the challenges were that the children weren't automatically overseen by the family advocate in divorce proceedings, and therefore they're not able to ensure the protection as well as the best interest of the children. And those are all challenges that that women face on a daily basis as they obtain a talak, and not being able to even enforce the not just but the actual Muslim rights as women. And as simple as just getting your nafaka, what does that mean and how can that be done um, through this particular process? Because we know in terms of civil marriages, if there's a divorce, the family advocate automatically gets informed. They have to look at the best interest of the children in terms of care and custody. There is also provisions in terms of you can ask for forfeiture of benefits if you've contributed. And we know that women also contribute significantly to the estates of their spouses, of their husbands. And so the provisions, the court has now given that certainty, as Aisha has spoken about. It's given a framework to be able to say, come to court, the talak has gone through, but we have to admit that it's also certain matters also, and we have to speak about the interim relief, because the interim relief is only up until the 15th of December, um, uh, when in 2014, when the matter was launched. Women's Legal Center obviously argued that it should be up until 1994, but the court obviously took the period up until 2014, which means that any matters as of that date that has been launched, that has not been finalized, will be able to be brought in terms of the Divorce Act.
Yes.
And the order also protects women in terms of polygynous marriages. And even though it is by nature out of community of property, there is an equitable provision in terms of 7.3 of the Divorce Act, which allows for assets and maintenance specifically in respect of marriages out of community of property, which is inconsistent with the constitutional right to equality and dignity and access to courts, etc. So we need to be able to look at this particular provision in that context, and to be able to see how we can get maintenance, post-divorce maintenance, as well as equitable distribution of assets of the, yeah.
Yes, Siam. And also, Aisha, Siam mentioned enforcement. And with the lack of enforcement, and I'm sure over the years, you've been challenged in more ways than one with the lack of enforcement. How challenging is that for a woman that gets divorced?
Well, to even get a talak is challenging, because we were forced to approach Jamiat and religious authorities who have no judicial standing, so they can't enforce your right to maintenance. They can't enforce nafaka during your idda period, or even what a lot of women experienced was when they approached these organizations. They get told, "Go back home, sister. You must sabr, sister." Allah doesn't like divorce. It's one of the most detested things, allowed things in Islam. And a lot of women were, struggled to even get a talaq given to them. Even approaching, trying to get fasakh was an issue. The whole process took long. Women face a panel of men. There's no females on the panels that are there to assist you. So it was really demeaning for a lot of women not being able to have any civil regulation. I mean, the argument is you could always approach the court, but there was nothing fixed, nothing formal that protected women in a Muslim marriage. So, it really was a tough for so many women who then give up the fight because it is soul destroying financially, emotionally, physically, mentally. It takes its toll on you, and not everybody is by the means of approaching the court. They don't have the finances, which is a really was a key issue for me. For the reason why I supported the recognition and regulation of Muslim marriages, because the whole court process, the wheels of the judiciary turn extremely slowly. So not everybody can afford it. There's women who are stuck in marriages because they can't get a talaq. The husband refuses a talaq. That axe is held over your head, and then they are not financially in a position where they can take the matter to court. And unfortunately, the women's legal centers aren't able to assist all the thousands of women out there that need assistance. So, this action that they've taken, it is of a benefit not only to one person but to thousands of South Africans. So, shukran, Shiham.
Yes, Shyam, just staying with the question of enforcement, and as Aisha mentioned, that within the own Muslim community and looking at enforcement mechanisms, and having followed Muslim personal law and the Muslim Marriages Bill for a very for a long time, in fact, for many years now, I have obviously been covering this, and there was a time where the enforcement mechanism within the Muslim community came under the radar. And, we looked at it closely. And I'm sure through your experience, you've seen enough, you've heard enough as well as to why we can't build the capacity that we require to build.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of broader enforcement, I mean, there has been major challenges whether or not it should be within a secular or whether or not it should just be within in the religious sphere. However, we need to be able to look at South Africa or South African Muslims within a very particular context, and to be able to say that our secular courts and also our constitution, provides rights which our which is provided which is provided for in terms of Sharia, etc. And we need to be able to see how is it that we'll be able to work those issues so that rights for women in particularly can be realized. And that has been also the major challenge, is to be able to see what is the most effective mechanism to ensure the enforcement, and whether or not the secular state process or the judicial system is much more cost effective, it's much more efficient than within another sphere, which those costs might even be carried by the women themselves.
Well, certainly. And also, I think, Aisha, when one looks at these developments, now this is not something that has happened. A lot has gone into this, a lot of thought has gone in. And, we've seen from the time when the applications were first launched against the government, I recall going back to 2014, and then the entire process had gone through the, I think it was the Western Cape High Court, if I'm not mistaken, and also, the Supreme Court, and now right until the Apex Court. So it has been a long battle. It's been quite a journey. And obviously now that this journey has ended, I've seen the press release from the Muslim from the Women's Legal Center as well. And obviously, elated. I've seen a lot of joy. I've seen a lot of happiness at the outcome and what the apex court has ruled.
Inayat, this isn't just since 2014. This struggle has been going on since 1994. You know, with the birth of the new constitution, which afforded everybody these rights. Why have Muslim women been excluded since then? There's so much legislation that has been passed between 1994 and 2022, which has given rights and recognition to other citizens of this country. And it's only now, in 28 years later, that Muslim women are getting their recognition. So it's not since 2014, it's since 1994. And I salute all the women and all the men and all the activists that have stood their ground, that have fought tirelessly to get us to this point in time.
Yes, and perhaps, Shyam, if you could take us through this journey as well.
Yes. I mean, we all know, I mean, there was South African Law Reform Commission, there was the CGE bill, there was numerous processes that many activists have gone through. And that is why in 2014, it was just the end of that particular road where we said, it's been so many years, we need to bring this case within the public interest. Because by that time there were two bills already that came through by 2014, the 2010 bill, and there was, like I said, there was two, and I think for many activists who have seen, and I would say the tears of many mothers, children that had to, sit and see parents being evicted from homes, not being able to access the courts, where the courts were too expensive. And we've seen with the Women's Legal Center, we couldn't assist everyone. And so that particular matter in 2014 was where activists and women rights activists, etc., also just indicated that this is that the court is now the only a place or will be able to protect the rights of women. And during that period, the Women's Legal Center and other institutions brought many cases that gave a more piecemeal approach, or had a piecemeal approach towards rights realization. But we knew that it did not apply, in all aspects, because there wasn't broader recognition, and cases were brought, and by 2014, like I indicated, when we launched, it took us so many years, more than 8 years, just to be able to get the judgment. But for us also, it might also just be the end of the beginning, because there's still a legislative process that we need to go through, which is, need to be done within 24 months. We do have interim relief, which we will have to work with. However, we need to ensure that the rights realization of women are within whatever reform the state brings in, whether or not it's existing legislation or new. We all know that there's also a current processes before the state, or which is there's the omnibus legislation, and there's the South African Law Reform Commission bill that we need to be able to engage with, to ensure that the rights of women and the rights, or Islamic rights of women, are retained, within this particular process. So still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yes, I'm actually quite glad you mentioned the Islamic rights as well, Siam, and also Aisha. Where I look at it, we're talking about three issues here. One, we're looking at current legislation. We're looking at things like the Marriages Act. We're looking at things like the Divorce Act, and measuring up to the Constitution in terms of how consistent these acts are. So present legislation. The second issue is, again, looking at Sharia law, looking at Islamic law, and how does that match up to the Constitution? How does that stand up to Constitution? And the third issue here is there are practical issues that people are faced with difficulty, particularly women, on a day-to-day basis. Now, these are three issues. These are challenges. These are huge challenges at this point in time. And at the end of the day, we haven't made any progress whatsoever, because I think women 20 or 30 years ago who suffered in marriages in any way whatsoever, whether it's been through divorce, whether it's been through polygamy, maintenance, and today are still faced with exactly the same problems.
No, definitely. Those problems, it's not going to go away overnight. But we have a basis to work on now. And we have to look at all those three issues, not separately. Try to reach. You're not going to get consensus, in my opinion. You're not going to get 100% consensus in all of those matters. But some legislation is better than nothing. Trying to assist these women and children who are finding themselves in this disadvantaged positions is a win. And in terms of Islam, justice, kindness, fairness, equity, those are tenets of Islam. Allah is not pleased when we are abusing our partners or our children by financially or emotionally. And going through a divorce, it's likened to death. Only somebody who's actually gone through it will understand the tremendous effort it takes to pick yourself up and continue. So having this legislation, interim relief, or working towards formal amendments to the legislation or enactment of new legislation, it gives us an opportunity to work together, not to work together and work on the issues in as a whole and not as three separate issues.
Just Siam, as Aisha mentioned, that these are issues that are not going to go away. But the key issue here is working with the powers that be. We're talking the likes of government. We're talking about legislation, but also looking at working with other members of the community of standing. Like she mentioned, the Jamiats. We're talking about the ulama councils, and just looking at the Women's Legal Center. In terms of your interaction with the, I wouldn't call them enforcement bodies, but the Islamic institutions within our communities, what sort of or what level of engagement have you had throughout this entire process?
Well, I mean, in the past, obviously, before 2014, with all the public participation processes, we were quite involved, with different structures within communities, and we're talking about mosques, different religious institutions, but I'm talking about since 2014, our engagement has only been in relation to the court and towards those parties that were party to it. It's obviously very difficult to be able to deal with different processes, but we haven't had separate processes with stakeholders in the community, other than platform engagements on social media or webinars, etc. But no formal relations. However, now that the matter is done, as Aisha indicated, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for all parties to be able to work together and to ensure that the primary value systems of the Sharia, objectives of kindness and justice, equity, is a broad framework to guide us all in terms of making decisions in what we want in terms of particular legislation. And it's a great opportunity for everybody to be able to work with, but also understanding that the Women's Legal Center represents women, and we represent the interests of women, and we will obviously, in terms of any future engagements, represent those interests, ensure that that the best in terms of protection are given to them.
Yes. Also, Aisha, I think, from what Siam is saying, working together. And I think, as a Muslim community in South Africa, I know we will be having our differences. You are still going to have those who are going to have extreme views regarding this particular judgment. And it's not only this judgment, and we know, if we see what has happened in the last few years in this country within the Muslim community, the amount of debate that has been going on other matters, like, for instance, during the COVID era, whether mosques should be closed, they shouldn't be closed, whether you should be wearing masks in the mosque, whether you shouldn't be wearing masks in the mosque, social distancing. Now, that obviously created massive divisions within the Muslim community, to the extent that, people were horribly insulted, where even a matter like whether a mosque should be opened or closed was a matter that actually went to court. Now, this is an extent and this is a level that we have taken. And here we are talking about marriage. We are talking about something that people live through day in and day out. We talk about family structures. We talk about a strong family structure as a building block to society. Now, these are bread and butter daily issues that we are faced with, and we need to find some common ground.
Mm.
No,
No,
definitely. Isiam, you
yeah,
go ahead.
I'll
no,
ask Siam to comment in a
yeah.
minute.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, those are all things. I mean, these issues are complex. It's not easy. However, we do know that with South African, us being South Africans, we come with our own history of patriarchy, um, in terms of the challenges of apartheid. These are all intersecting forms of identities or discrimination that all impacts on us as Muslim women and just generally Muslims. And we need to be able to take this into account when we talk about, the barriers that face women before they even get into the legislative process, because those are all things that we need to be able to deal with. And what does that look like in our communities? What does patriarchy look like in terms of our communities and the barriers that stop women from even approaching the courts to be able to access their rights? And we need to be able to shift that. And as Aisha said, this is the beginning, this is the start. It's a process for us to be able to build something different from our past, but taking into account the principles of Sharia, of kindness and equity, etc., and to build that into the future of our own South African Muslim identity.
Well,
And
clearly,
just
and I
to
think when we're talking about this whole culture of, kindness and justice in Islam, and this is where, Sister Aisha, where our religious bodies, our ulama, our scholars have a major role to play within the Muslim community to inculcate and to make sure that people truly understand what Islam actually means in terms of fairness, in terms of justice, even in a matter like divorce. At the end of the day, we shouldn't be left with situations where women are now thrown out of their homes, in the street, need to fend for their children. And I know, Sister Aisha, you've had this experience. So this is what I'm saying is, we need to complement each other rather than work against each other.
No, 100%. I mean, the Quran says no mother will be harmed on account of her child, and no father will be harmed on account of a child. So after years or decades of marriage, um, you know, when a marriage is dissolved and a woman is told you have to leave your home because
Mm.
this is mine, when she has contributed with blood, sweat, and tears to that family, it might not have been going out and working, but contributions in the home, that should be quantifiable as well. That should be taken into account as well. And when the marriage is dissolved, it needs to be done in a way where nobody is going to be burdened. It's not, so those we find, the lived experience is that a woman's contribution to the house is not considered. You're just a housewife. You haven't done anything. So the fact that she stayed at home and reared the children, looked after the house while the husband was allowed to go and climb the corporate ladder or, you know, at the end of the marriage, like in my case, after 20 years, after 19 years, I didn't have any work experience. That is what counted against me, you know. You're now 40 years old, you don't have workplace experience. So that's the difficulty that a lot of women find, and that why they tend to stay in the marriage. So we need to, when we are talking now, when we are working towards new legislation, these are the kinds of things that needs to be considered, because not considering that is not just, it's not kind, it's not fair, and it's not equitable.
Well, certainly. Now, Siam, let's just look at some of the issues that are contained in the statement, and let's just go into certain specifics. And looking at the court and looking at, for instance, some of the legislation where we're looking at the Marriage Act, we're looking at the Divorce Act that has been found inconsistent with the Constitution. And let's just hone in a bit on certain specific issues in this regard.
Okay, yes. With regard to the inconsistency, I mean, we're looking at where Muslim spouses obviously were not included in terms of the Marriages Act, and which, if they're not included, they can't bring a matter in terms of the Divorce Act. In terms of the Divorce Act in particular, but this is only in terms of the interim relief. And so in terms of the Divorce Act, the court also gave set out provisions for women that is married, not women but spouses in polygynous marriages. Even though the provision in itself, or the marriage, is out of community of property, there is a provision in terms of 7.3 that broadly speaks to the equitable distribution of an estate as well as maintenance. And we need to look at post-divorce maintenance, beyond the nafaka period. And these are all that will possibly be able to be looked at in terms of this particular provision. And so it's quite sad that many of these rights are already provided for Muslim women in terms of Sharia. The difficulty is that the ulama never had the tools or the mechanisms to ensure that enforcement. And because this has been given, or this order, this frame has been given to us, it allows us to really start developing what justice and equity means in terms of divorce for women. And how, what is it that, for example, Islam speaks about nafaka that needs to be given, speaks about post-divorce maintenance. We need to look at that in terms of periods, etc. And those are all things that can be looked at. The order, all not the order, but the judgment also speaks to the rights, obviously, of children, which is very important in terms of custody, contact, and care, because where women were married in terms of, or not women, persons that are married in terms of a civil marriage, automatically the family advocate has an obligation to do a report in terms of which will be in the best interest of the child. So now there's this obligation also now on the family advocate, because of the provisions of the Divorce Act, which places that obligation on the family advocate. And we need to be able to look at that. But obviously this is all interim relief. The legislative process needs to be completed within 24, not legislative, but whatever the state decides in terms of the framework needs to be completed in 24 months.
Yes, and Aisha, I think when we are talking of interim relief, and it's important that we understand this term interim relief. What are we actually referring to?
Interim relief, it's in for now, just in layman's term. It's not final. It's just for now until the matter is resolved. So between now the judgment and between new legislation being enacted or amendments made to current legislation, this is what women, or this is what people can use. This is the mechanism at our disposal to gain access to relief in the form of maintenance, or whatever needs to be done, even approaching the court for a divorce order. So it's
Yes,
not
and
the final thing.
not the final thing. And Siam, I'm sure there are many examples of the type of interim relief that is being sought.
Yes, I mean, in particular around maintenance, also in terms of the dissolution of the estate, even though it's to ensure that it's just and equitable in terms of contributions that have been made. More times than not, we also know that South Africa historically, pre 1994, mostly transferred state property to the male, and we know that women is disproportionately impacted by the fact that they traditionally do not have property in their name. This allows the spouse to be able to, in particular women, to come to court to be able to say that they want a just and equitable distribution.
Yes, I actually seen a comment come up, and I'm going to ask my engineer to put this comment up on screen because this is quite an interesting comment. I see this Kari Ahmed Saeed who says, if you are a woman who dislikes the idea that a wife should follow and obey her husband, my question to you is this: do you dislike it because you dislike the entire concept of obedience and followership in general, and because you believe that a woman's role in the family should be one of independence and leadership? So you dislike the very concept of hierarchy in any form and believe only in an egalitarian marriage. Simply put, do you feel that you shouldn't have to follow or obey anyone? I'm not too sure. Aisha or Siam, comment on this.
Well, I do think that Islam in itself gives us independence as women. And so I do think that it is not about obey, but it's about respect of spouses, which has its clear roles, which has been set out. I think that Aisha would most probably want to comment, maybe also in addition to that. But I do think it's not either or. If we speak about respecting a person who is human, person is your partner, it is not just about obeying. It's about ensuring that the roles and responsibilities are met, but also understanding the lived realities, which Aisha has spoken about. Many women has taken leadership, not leadership position, but has taken a clear role because of their work opportunities, because of that there's changing roles within society, because many of the roles have been gendered. And it is nothing for a father to also stay at home and a mother, for example, historically to work. And I think that you need to be able to understand it in the context of what is required of that particular, in that particular role as a partner in the marriage. And I think we need to be able to understand it in that context. And I think maybe if we read the comment less in terms of, I would say, more masculine patriarchal energy of obeying, etc., then we will understand that women in Islam have got the independence, their dignity, and it's quite sad that the state, that South African state, had to come to their aid and to be able to assist with rights that has already been given in terms of Islam.
Well,
Yeah.
clearly, and I think, Sister Aisha, you're going to comment. All right, yeah, comment, and then I'll just obviously add to what Siam has to say.
So, I mean, my belief is that we each have our roles. men and women, we each have our roles, complementing roles. So it's not a matter of obeying or following or being a leader. It's complementary roles. And in this day and age, in the context that we are living in the economic context that we are living in, Siham speaks about women having to go out and work. And yes, it is important for both parties, to be able to go out and work and contribute towards the family unit. And that shouldn't be seen as a woman trying to take charge. It should be seen as parties wanting to work together, in mutual love and respect for the benefit of their family. And it's not as not wanting to follow or not wanting, to follow a leader or wanting to, it's specific roles, complementary roles that should be respected.
Well, certainly. In fact, that was a comment I was going to make as well. And I mean, we know that men and women have got specific roles. There are things that women can do. There are things that men can only do. But at the end of the day, it is about complementing each other. And even in the Quran, and we hear it over and over again when a nikah or a marriage is taking place, and they talk about one being the garment of the other. So that complementary role is absolutely important. And I suppose sometimes, Aisha or Shyam, either of you could comment on this, that we misinterpret the term obedience.
I don't know if it's about misinterpreting the term. I think I mean, we live, whether we want to admit it or not, we live in a very patriarchal society. And so obedience is kind of used against women, you have to be obedient and you have to follow and things like that. So I don't know if it's about misinterpreting. I think it's just about using the words in the wrong context.
Oh,
okay. Siam, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree with Aisha. It's got to do with, it's not about submissive or, it's a language that we trying to move away from, because it's about inclusivity. It's about ensuring that people understand, like Aisha said, the roles and the responsibilities, and to be able to build for the family unit. And that should be the higher priorities. And I think people's focus is more on submission, and it shouldn't be. Yeah.
Yes, and also I think just moving away, like from issues like maintenance, for instance, there are obviously other issues that we need to talk about, and we know there have been contentious issues. The issue of taking a second or a third wife, polygamous marriages, that is another issue, Siam, that we need to obviously drill down to. We need to obviously interrogate. We need to look at the question of polygamous marriages very, very closely in terms or against a current legislation at this point in time.
Well, I mean, the judgment itself acknowledges polygynous marriages. We've got the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. We need to accept the fact that polygynous marriages is a reality for many women, Muslim women, and therefore even an organization like the Women's Legal Center, we see the different forms of intersecting identities, and we respect the fact that Muslim women enters into polygynous marriages, but that does not mean that they do not have the same rights as any other woman that is married in terms of any other law or legislation, and because the dignity for all those women should be respected.
Yes, and also I think looking at some other issues as well, and I'm looking at practical day-to-day issues, Aisha. For instance, marriageable age. Now I know that has been an issue that has come out in the past, and we know what the Sharia ruling is as far as marriageable age goes. And again, looking at it against the Constitution and whether the test, whether Sharia law can stand up to the Constitution in some of these matters, which are going to be contentious.
the marriageable age, it's not only in South Africa where it's 18. There are numerous countries where 18 is the legal age for marriage, and for various reasons. So that's not in itself something strange for us to have that 18 is the the legal age of marriage. I think having it legislated is good, because we've had in the past instances with child marriages. And if you look at whether a child is able to navigate marriage, when women in their 20s and 30s are struggling to navigate marriage, a younger child, how are they equipped? How well are they equipped to deal with?
Sister Aisha, can I
them?
just stop you there for a minute? I've just seen them. I know Siam has to leave. Just some final thoughts before you take leave of us for about a minute or two, Siam.
Yes. We just wanted to say, I mean, that there's still a long process. And this will still obviously remain challenges in terms of maybe accessing the courts. However, that we need to be able to work together to ensure the right realization of Muslim women. And I believe that the legislative process, through its public participation process, will possibly bring us together to be able to ensure that, like I said before, we have the rights realization for Muslim women, and the rights that have been provided for in terms of Sharia, and is incorporated, within these processes.
Well, Siam, shukran for that and for
Assalamu
your
alaikum.
time. And I know you have to rush, but it's been wonderful that you're able to join us on this panel discussion tonight.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, Aisha, let's just continue with what we were talking about. And we've got about 10 or 12 minutes, so possibly there may be one or two issues, and we can obviously wind down the program.
Sure.
Okay, Sister Aisha, before we get there, I see another message come up, and from the same Qari Saeed says, a widespread act of zulm, injustice prevalent in the Muslim community of these times is the suppression and even denial of the rights of inheritance of females. Many people regard the rights of inheritance of females as of secondary importance. Greater importance and priority are accorded to the rights of males, in spite of the fact that the Sharia states the right of inheritance of males and females with equal emphasis. While there is disparity in the shares of males and females, it just says the right of, and I've got 3 dots. So, this is obviously another issue. Sister Aisha, inheritance, it's a topic on its own. It's a subject on its own. It's a huge topic. And we know it's a very, very contentious topic as well.
Well, I'm not an Islamic scholar, and I don't purport to be one. But again, it comes back down to respecting, it comes down to justice and kindness and equity, and understanding what the rights are and giving effect to what the Quran, the rights that Islam, that Allah has given to females. So that's my answer. It's our rights as Islamic rights that shouldn't be downplayed.
Well, definitely. Now, I know, as Siham mentioned, that there is still a long way to go. It's a long, long process. And at this point in time, looking at many women, the issues that they have, these are still going to be in limbo for a very, very long time to come until, and let's hope that the sooner the legislators get down to doing their business, finalizing matters, and I think in the interest of everybody now that the apex court has ruled. So we're not going to have a situation where we're going to now debate the merits and the demerits. The key issue is to work together and to find a way forward for the benefit of everyone.
Of everybody. No, 100%. That should be our goal, is to discourse is good, but use the discourse to reach a decision, or to reach a point where we're looking at what is in the best interest of children, and also dealing with spouses fairly, so that one is not disadvantaged, And I wanted to come back to Siham's comment about Section 7.3 about the redistribution of assets, which I think it's really an important part of the judgment, because oftentimes assets are transferred. I would say like different mechanisms, like trusts are used as mechanism for assets are transferred into trusts, and that becomes excluded, and women or spouses are not able to access those assets. So being able to apply to the court for the just redistribution of assets, and being able to look at these things which have maybe been transferred out of into a trust or into a different mechanism, and giving the woman a fair chance of her share in these assets. I really am happy with that section of the judgment and of the order.
Yes, I think that was absolutely necessary, because we see this over and over again. We see it time and again. And as you mentioned, sometimes it does not require a monetary contribution to the assets that have been built over a period of time. And often we see sometimes marriages after 20, 30 years where substantial assets have been built. And it's not about, who put the money in, but it requires equal effort, because
effort.
Exactly. And I think this is sometimes where we actually lose focus on. And again, one needs to guard against what I would call creative ways of trying to get away, as far as making sure that the other party gets a fair share of what is due to them.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's very important. It is. Especially for those women who have been in long-standing marriages at the age, my experiences with, in doing this work in the recent years, there's women in their late 50s, 60s, 70s who are ending up, with the marriages are dissolved, and what do they have to show for it? Then also, what is the earning potential at the age of 50, 60, 70? Even for myself, at the age of 40, I consider myself lucky that I was able to do a course, or that after that I've been able to register for my law degree. I feel lucky that I'm able to afford that. There are other women who are not that lucky and who really, really struggle to put food on the table, to take care of themselves, to take care of the children, because the mothers are the ones who end up with their children, and we are the ones who most of the time are left not with a burden, but left with the struggle of raising the children and doing everything for the children. So if the marriage, this legislation comes into effect, and we're able to protect the women so that, and the children, that they don't have to go through that trauma, then alhamdulillah, I think it's a good thing.
Yes, I think the key issue here is one needs to remain positive throughout this, and also, again, introspection, which is absolutely important. And this is what is required of us now that this judgment has been made. As a Muslim community, introspect where we are, what are we doing, where are we going wrong, what do we need to do, because this is extremely important. And instead of being negative about it and just looking at this judgment at face value, to actually drill down deep within us, to look at us as a society and say, these are problems. These are real problems that we are faced with as an ummah, as a community, as a society. And we need to obviously do something about it. And it's more, like we say, action speaks louder than words.
And we have a duty. It's our duty as a Muslim, if there is injustice, to stand up, to speak up, to speak out against injustice. We shouldn't be the ones to cover it, or entertain it, or even allow it to continue. Injustice is injustice, and we're going to be answerable if we are a party to the continuation of injustice. and the
Well, Sister
continuation
Aisha,
of oppression.
I must say Jazakallah, shukran to you.
You're
It's
most
been a
welcome.
pleasure having you on the panel discussion tonight. And, we are having a discussion with certain ulama as well as a follow-up program. And we'd like to obviously get their thoughts and their sentiments on this apex court ruling. And I think more importantly, to look at how we can actually move forward from here without pointing fingers at each other, but more importantly, to work together, like you say, in the interest of justice. Because that is what Islam is all about. We know our Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is just as well. And we need to inculcate this quality of justice within ourselves. But for now, shukran. And we value your time with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, and shukran so much for having me this evening.
Well, Aisha Roka and Siam Samai with us this evening on this it's an important topic. It's a very, in fact, something that we have been talking about for many, many years. But now that the Apex Court has come to this decision, we need to actually move forward, and we need to find the best solutions for us as a Muslim Ummah so that we can actually move forward. And also, I think looking at society, looking at some of the issues, looking at some the problems that we are faced with, to address these problems, to try and resolve these problems, and not get to a stage where we are going to be then, pointing fingers at the government and pointing fingers at the court, where we ourselves need to sort our own problems within ourselves, and it can be done. There is nothing impossible, but sometimes it is all about egos. It is all about proving a point to the opposite party, and we see it over and over in marriages, where you are trying to prove a point, and at the end of the day, when we are faced with situations where we have divorce, when we have maintenance issues, when we have children that are suffering in the process, then we sit up and we are now trying to, when the situation has got so bad, that we try and actually look at solutions. But before we get to that, the answers are there. Islam has provided us with the guidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the life of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has provided us with the perfect example as to how we should conduct ourselves when it comes to these matters. And with that, the time is just gone, 8 p.m. I'm going to be leaving you with a fascinating interview that we had with Dr. Khalid Al-Owaisi out of Turkey. And he is in South Africa at this point in time. And he's had workshops in Johannesburg already. He will be coming through to Durban towards the end of this week. You need to look out for that, and also heading to Cape Town. And really, I found it fascinating looking at the history, the historical issues with regard to Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem, the Palestinian problem, the Palestinian question, and also looking at contemporary issues and the challenges with regard to Masjid al-Aqsa. Really, it's worth your while. And if you haven't even thought of actually making arrangements to get to one of these sessions, I urge you to do so, because it definitely is very, very enriching. A lot of value will be added to your life, and more importantly, the understanding and the appreciation of the people of Palestine, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to protect Masjid al-Aqsa, its honor and its dignity. The time is just gone 8 p.m. So when I come back, we're going to leave you with this fascinating interview we had with Dr. Khalid Al-Owaisi.